Welcome to this evening's Cabinet meeting. Let me start with the filming at meetings notice. Just to say to people that this meeting may be filmed or recorded by the Council for live or subsequent broadcast via the internet site or by anyone attending the meeting using any communication method. And although we ask members of the public recording, filming or reporting on the meeting not to include the public seating areas, members of the public attending the meeting should be aware that we cannot guarantee that they will not be filmed or recorded by others attending the meeting. Members of the public participating in the meeting should be aware that they're likely to be filmed, recorded or reported on. By entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you're consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings. As chair of the meeting, I have discretion to terminate or suspend filming or recording if, in my opinion, continuation of filming, recording or reporting would disrupt or prejudice the proceedings, infringe the rights of any individual or may lead to a breach of a legal obligation by the Council. With that done, can we start with apologies for absence, Aisha?
Chair, we have no apologies for absence. Okay.
In terms of urgent business, we have one late item to consider in relation to item 7 from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Does anyone need to make a declaration of interest? We're on item 4. No, I don't see any. We haven't received any notices to, in relation to item 5. Item 6, then, are the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of February. I'm looking at Cabinet members now. Are you happy for us to sign those minutes as a correct record of the meeting? Thank you. Item 7, matters referred to Cabinet by Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Councillor Connor, can I invite you to come forward and introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. Hello. I've come before you tonight with a recommendation made at the Adults and Health Scrutiny Panel that is backed by Overview and Scrutiny to pause the closure of Osborne Grove Nursing Home until the options appraisal is made available to yourselves in the summer. When, as a Cabinet, you agreed to close Osborne Grove in December last year, you did so with the understanding that the options appraisal will be made available within a month at the January Cabinet meeting. As this has been delayed until the summer, I would strongly suggest the decision to close is paused until you have this information in front of you. Closure of any nursing home comes with risk. These residents are frail, often with high levels of physical and mental health needs, and any decision to move them has to be taken with all the information available, especially as there is a great risk of health deterioration with any move. We have a duty to act in the best interests of our residents. According to the Council's own consultation, 100% of those who completed the consultation said they did not want to move. The CQC re-inspected Osborne Grove in July and found it had moved up from inadequate to requires improvement, with actually 2 out of the 5 areas now being rated as good. In fact, they go on to say, the management team were working well together and had made recent improvements in safety, quality of care, food, record keeping, staff morale and cleanliness in the home. If we're to move our residents out of nursing homes that requires improvement, why are we not moving everyone out of Priscilla Wakefield? Where will our residents go from Osborne Grove? We don't have a nursing home in Haringey that is rated as good. It is very unnecessary to cause residents distress by removing them from their friends, family and much needed community, when instead we should be concentrating on improving the care at Osborne Grove. Another major concern is that if someone does choose to go to a home outside Haringey rated as good, then a waiting list currently applies. So in the meantime, the Council may have to move the residents in the interim to yet another home. This would mean not only the residents having to move twice, but also having to face all the risks that come with the move. So in weighing up all the risks associated with the closure, as a Cabinet, I urge you to wait until you have the options appraisal in front of you. Because how can you consider such a major decision as this without having all the facts available? In pausing, you will be showing the determination of the Council to provide the best care for residents. This will then be strengthened by supporting staff in continuation to improve care and provide much needed stability whilst all options are considered. The oversight of the CQC remains vital and they can be called back to reassess how care is being delivered. Councillors, if you have any doubt in your mind The sensible decision is to pause, just for a few months, until the option appraisal is available, to look at providing nursing care on this existing site. This decision is one I, along with many others, hope you will agree to tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Connor. I'm going to ask the Cabinet Member to respond. I'd thought that I might hear something from you that I would have heard that was new since the 12th of December, and in fact you referred to a meeting in July, a CQC inspection in July, which we considered at the meeting on the 12th of December when we took the key decision. I'll turn to Councillor Vanier.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and also the Adult Health Scrutiny Panel for the time and the attention that they've taken to ensure that the process of closure of Osborne Grove Nursing Home is carried out smoothly and with full attention to detail. Can I say, first of all, that the decision to close a care home is not one which the Council would take lightly. And whilst we've considered the matter from every angle, the safety and welfare of residents have always been and will continue to be our paramount concern. Of course, we recognise that such a decision has a profound impact on residents and their families and friends for whom Osborne Grove is their home. And we do understand the feelings that are being experienced. In response to the recommendation from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I'd like to make a few points. First of all, I'd like to say that the decision to close the Osborne Grove Nursing Home was made on the basis of quality of care and sustainability issues that was set out in the Cabinet report of December 12th. The decision was not one that was made contingent to the future use of that site for nursing care or for other options related to provisions of nursing care. And I have to say, those quality care and sustainability issues still remain. Despite every effort by staff and managers, regular audits conducted by management continue to highlight non-compliance issues in the safe care and treatment of residents. In addition to that, the Establishment Concerns Group that last met in December to consider quality and safeguarding issues was not satisfied in regard to safe care and treatment. Members of that group included the Commission Quality Assurance, the CCG Clinical Assurance staff, the CCG Safeguarding Lead, and a CQC representative. You all know that the process of implementation of the decision made at the December the 12th Cabinet is already on the way. In line with the decision and as set out in the recent information packs provided to residents and families, the multi-agency reassessments of residents are being carried out. As a matter of fact, some of the residents have moved, and a number of others are at the point of being ready to move, having found suitable alternative accommodation. These residents and their families feel confident about the move, that they are satisfied with the new facility, and that they have been effectively engaged in the process. we're only too aware of the stress and the anxiety of the process that is taking place, and we would wish to minimise the anxiety and disruption that may be caused further if further changes occur at this stage. Our view remains that the care delivered at Osborne Grove is not of sufficient high quality for residents. Furthermore, it's our view that the best interest of residents are best served by ensuring that their care and support needs can be met in a high quality setting. So, with regards to the options appraisal, I have to say this is a distinct piece of work which sets out the future options for the use of the site in the future after the closure of Osborne Grove. This is because the home, as it's currently constituted, it's not sustainable. It cannot deliver the quality of care consistently as required. It's not built to the standard required for a nursing care provision. It does not contain the capacity to make it economically viable. So, I'd like to thank you for your invaluable input, but for the reasons that I've just stated, I do not support the recommendation of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and I would advise Cabinet not to accept a pause in the current process of closure.
Thank you, Councillor Vanier. Cabinet members, this is a meeting that's conducted in public. It's not a public meeting, and for purposes of people who need to hear on the webcam, I'd ask that people don't heckle from the public gallery. Cabinet members, I'll ask you to. You've heard the reasons set out by Councillor Vanier. Can we agree not to accept the scrutiny recommendation for a pause in the current process of closure for Osborne Grove? Is that agreed? Okay, thank you, Councillor Connor. We now move on in the agenda to item 8. We do not have any deputations, petitions or questions. So on to item 9, the High Road West leaseholder offer. You're very welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting, but the agenda has moved on to High Road West leaseholder offer. Can the meeting note that the report's got exempt information at item 26? Councillor Strickland, if we just pause for a moment as people leave the public gallery, and then I'll ask you to introduce the report. Councillor Strickland, if you'd like to make a start.
Thank you very much. So Cabinet colleagues will be aware that we've discussed High Road West on a number of occasions, and aware from a meeting last year that we've been working hard with leaseholders on the estate through workshops and other means to talk to them about the terms, to make sure they're properly supported in the regeneration scheme. So officers have been working very hard to work with the leaseholders and work up the leaseholder offer. Now, what this report sets out is that having done lots of consultation, having worked up an offer, that we've had advice that the consultation had two challenges with it, and in order to make the consultation full and robust, that we need to rerun that consultation. That's obviously quite frustrating, but we're committed to working with leaseholders and making sure that they get a fair offer, and obviously one that's been developed belt and braces with everything done absolutely correctly. So the report recommends that we rerun that consultation, and also following our decision in 2017 to agree a CPO indemnity agreement gives delegations to the Director to get on and start acquiring properties in the regeneration zone.
Thank you, Councillor Strickland. Councillor Engert and then Councillor Brabazon, your questions?
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions. On page 60, how will leaseholders be informed in advance on individual properties, the different costs, like utilities, service charges and insurance, that they need to take into account when making an informed decision to move to another property? On page 29 at 2.5, we seem to be getting a number of reconsultations, like Wood Green Area Action Plan. Not getting it right in the first place seems a waste of officer time and money. Why was this original consultation flawed, and why was it not carried out properly in the first place? And my third point, on page 31, 5.3, I note the concern you're requesting delegated authority to officers to approve compulsory purchase orders on leasehold properties in Love Lane. And this is a change in the Constitution, as many will be above 500,000. The total sum of the budget being nearly 88 million. Should this change of Constitution not have been put through Standards Committee? And is this decision premature? We're about to have a new administration.
Okay, and Councillor Brabazon, if you'd like to come forward and ask your questions, and I'll ask the Cabinet Member to deal with them in one round.
I've read the flawed consultation document. I have to say I'm a reasonably educated person. Took me quite a while to understand it. So I'd like to know, in this redrafting of this flawed consultation, how are you going to ensure that it is in plain English, which leaseholders, ordinary layperson, could understand? That's my first question. The second question is, have you explained to people what these technical flaws are so that they're clear? And I've been told that the leaseholders were given professional advice from somebody, a professional view from a fellow of the Consultation Institute, who thought that this was a type of consultation that was probably likely to lead to a very successful judicial review. So I would like to know how are you going to amend it, what the timescale is, and when you think you're likely to go out to consultation with leaseholders again with a document that is comprehensible, clear and not flawed. My other question is also in relation to these the delegated authority to purchase the third-party land interest by private treaty. Have any negotiations been taking place with businesses already, and if so, have there been any deals made? Thank you.
Councillor Strickland.
Thank you very much. So let me pick up most of those questions. I'll get Sarah to answer a couple of them. So in terms of the consultation, you're absolutely right, Councillor Engel. It's obviously very frustrating that these issues emerged. But significant officer work was done on the consultation, to plan the consultation. Colleagues from across the authority were consulted on that. Now, sometimes, because this involves complex legal issues, sometimes issues emerge later on when things are reviewed that mean that something's been missed, and that, I think, is what happened in this case. In terms of the constitutional question and the delegation to the Director around agreeing CPOs, I think it's important to say, and Bernie can come in on this, but The Director will not be going around personally CPOing property. This is to seek to negotiate, as the report says, private treaty agreements. So what any public body is expected to do is to negotiate with landholders, and of course CPO is only a last resort. Now, as the report sets out quite clearly in 5.3, when we're seeking to acquire homes or businesses or pieces of land, obviously what we can't really have is a situation where officers supported by independent valuations are having a commercial negotiation with an owner. They reach an agreement with that owner, and the officer has to say, oh, well, hang on, I'll have to come back to you in 3 months because I need to go through the whole cabinet process. I think the report sets out quite clearly why that's not practical, and therefore it makes more sense that the Director has the authority, where an agreement's been reached, to authorise a purchase. Councillor Brabers, in terms of your questions, you asked around clarity on what the particular flaws were. They are set out quite clearly in the report, and it makes clear that we were advised that more information should be provided on the Council's preferred option and why it was our preferred option, and also, just to be clearer, that the leaseholder offer applies to leaseholders who were living on the estate at the time that the master plan was agreed in 2014. So there are two clarifications. There's no major flaw, as I understand it, with the consultation. It's about clarifying two things. In terms of your question around the document itself, we are talking about complicated issues, and we are talking about money moving back and forth. So officers have tried to make it as clear as possible. Obviously, I'm very happy to ask officers to do further work with comms to see if they can clarify it further. But again, it does say in the report that workshops were held. They were all attended by the independent tenant and leaseholder advisor. A Turkish interpreter was present at those workshops. So lots of work was done to try and make sure that everybody fully understood what was going on. If I can ask Sarah to pick up the point from the question from Councillor Enger on working out in advance the costs people might expect to face, and to pick up Councillor Braberson's final question, which is around the timescales that we expect moving forward to the next steps.
About whether any land has yet been bought through private treaty, and I'd like to know.
Okay. With regards to the costs, I'm presuming that you mean the cost of the replacement homes that will be built for the resident leaseholders, so the new homes within the High Road West area? Yep.
Whatever leaseholder they're taking, offer they're taking.
Yep.
They know those costs. Of course, you did say those won't guarantee the other.
Yep. So what we're seeking to do is work with leaseholders and the Love Lane residents on the design of the replacement homes. And we've spoke previously at Cabinet that it's not just going to be the design of the homes, it's going to be the design of the services within the homes, because we previously talked about the service charges, which will be applicable to those properties, and we want to ensure that residents get the services that they want, but they're also affordable. So what we'll be seeking to do with the Love Lane residents through the design process over the next few months is work with them to work through the type and level of service that they want within these new homes. As we go through that process, we'll gain a better understanding of what the level of service charge will be, and we will communicate those costs as and when we get them so leaseholders can make informed decisions. I think the other cost you referred to is insurance. I think that would be down to the leaseholder themselves and the type of insurance policy they would take out. But certainly it's kind of within our plan that we'll engage with leaseholders and tenants to talk about service charges and give that information as it's available. In terms of timescales for reconsulting, obviously we will be very soon entering into the PERDA period, so we envisage that we'd like to speak to the new administration about when that consultation would take place. Ideally we do that as soon as possible because we're quite keen to keep some momentum. We've had 3 workshops with leaseholders. We've, through the workshops, explained to them kind of where we've got to in terms of addressing their concerns and how we can meet some of their aspirations but not all of them. So we'd like to very much go out as soon as possible to keep that momentum and to actually get the offer agreed so leaseholders can make some decisions. In terms of acquisitions on relating to the High Road West scheme, so we've got the acquisitions that are going to predominantly lead to delivery of High Road West, we've had a number of negotiations, but we haven't actually acquired any as of yet. The acquisitions that I've been concentrating on have been primarily in relation to the delivery of White Hart Lane Station. So White Hart Lane Station has some funding available from the original MRF funding from the Mayor, and so that's been our primary focus today, is acquiring the Jones Baker site, some UKPN land, to deliver the station, which is due to be finalised next year. Now we've got a delivery partner, there'll be much more work in regards to negotiating with the other landowners. We've had lots of conversations. Some negotiations have progressed quite far. Nothing's been bought so far.
And Bernie, do you want to come in on the constitutional point?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, this is a delegation from Cabinet. It's not an amendment to the Constitution requiring it to go to Standards Committee.
Okay, thank you for that. We've got exempt information at this item, as I said at the outset, so we'll return to it at item 26 on the agenda. Item 10, Councillor Arthur, the Budget Monitoring Report.
Thank you, Leader. Most of this, if not all of it, was covered in the report that went to full Council in February. So just to note that from Q2, there's been a slight improvement in the position, although clearly still an overspend on the revenue account. So we're now at 5.4 as opposed to 6.5. There is an underspend, however, on the HRA.
Councillor Elliott, your question.
Thank you, Chair. I just have three brief questions. On page 71, 9.3, what is the 2.08 million budget on the relocation of the Civic Centre in the 2017 to 18 budget being spent? What's it being spent on? On page 73, I note that 77% of the savings targets on children's services and 80% of the corporate savings are unlikely to be delivered this year. Obviously, the budgeting was unrealistic, as I've often found in the past. How is this finally going to be addressed? And on page 67, 7.7, the inclusion service traded income is 0.2 million less than budget. And to quote, the service continues to expect bookings from schools. Isn't this also somewhat optimistic? Sorry? You want the last one? Oh, page 67, 7.7.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Arthur, do you want Councillor Weston to pick up the schools and children's points and you address the others?
Yep, happy to. In terms of the first question, I guess I would say, and in fact I might touch on all three and then allow Councillor Weston to pick up anything that they miss. On the children's point and the overarching budget and whether it's suitable, firstly I would say these are conversations that and questions that probably should have come through the budget process as opposed to after in March, given that they were in the budget for full council. Certainly, I think when looking at the budget that we set last year, I think it's right to say that we were over-optimistic on some of the savings. You'll have seen from the budget papers that we haven't added any new savings onto Priority 1 for 18 to 19. A number of the savings that were agreed for 19 to 20 and 18 to 19, I think, are ones that we have to monitor very closely, because if you were to rag rate them, they were amber or red. Clearly, the service area is focusing in on all of the initiatives that we would still say are important. So how can we ensure that we reduce the amount of agency staff? How can we engage in early help and prevention in a more effective way than we have in the past, etc. But I think the lessons have been learned. I'd also say that what we're seeing in Haringey, and this report refers to, for example, the growth in looked after children numbers and some of the pressures that that's created, are pressures that it's not just Haringey have seen, but children's services across the country. So I think we should bear in mind the context of austerity and cuts. Yes, it's had a negative impact on us, but it has had a negative impact on most, if not all, local authorities, and we're all having to deal with that. On the Civic Centre, I might point to Richard Grice just to comment on that.
So the costs around the Civic Centre around accelerating the work on move to Woodside House, particularly for the registrars, which is largely largely a commercial activity. We're taking bookings for weddings in the summer, and we needed to have the property ready and open by that point. So that's where the money's been spent.
And then I think the last question was on school.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I suppose I would just reiterate everything that Councillor Arthur said about the need to manage the impact of austerity against a background of significant and rising demand in children's services. The bottom line with all of this, Councillor Engert, is that where there is rising demand, we must meet it, and we must keep those children safe and make sure their needs are met. And there are costs involved in that. But as Councillor Arthur said, measures are being put in place, and we're doing what we can to try and make sure that that budget remains stable. On the point around the inclusion service, as you can see from 7.7, the first bullet point, it's a new service, but I'm more than happy to write to you with some further details around that expected bookings point.
Okay, Cabinet, can I ask you to turn to page 64, section 3.1, which contains the recommendations. Are those recommendations agreed? Thank you. Item 11 is the corporate plan delivery summary, which is a really important document which takes everybody through everything that has been delivered against the corporate plan targets over the course of this administration. Councillor Engert, did you have a question on this? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I have 4 questions. On page 119, only 23% rather than the target of 95% of pothole repairs have been achieved. You say this is due to contractor failure. Why was this not picked up earlier on? On page 120, travelling by bicycle, the performance information says that 3% was achieved against a target of 5%. Was this target ever achievable, given, to quote, it needs large-scale behaviour change? And on page 122, the figures for violence with injury and robbery have well overshot their targets. How are you going to deliver, again, the large-scale behaviour change cited in the reasons for this shortfall? And on page 136, only 64% of residents are satisfied with homes for Haringey, as against a target of 81%. How do you aim to address this? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Engert. Did Cabinet members want to pick up the specific points? The alternative is we can write back to Councillor Engert. But if I start with you, Councillor Mitchell, is there anything you wanted to say about the pothole point?
Well, all I'd say is that we certainly have picked up the problems with that contract and are in discussions about alternative ways of dealing with pothole repairs across the borough. But indeed, I can write with further information if you wish. And on the litter point which you raised, I mean, I think it's right that we set ourselves ambitious targets, and we always strive to meet those targets as best we can. And we recognise that litter and debris on the streets is something that concerns all our residents, and we do everything we can to try and address that.
I think similar true of the cycling issue that you raised. All of these were challenging targets, and as Councillor Mitchell says, quite rightly so. Councillor Strickland on Homes for Haringey.
Thank you. Now, what I've agreed with Homes for Haringey is they will run workshops with tenants and leaseholders, because, of course, one of the challenges with tenant satisfaction is when the figures are not where we expect them to be and want them to be, we get sort of raw data. It doesn't necessarily tell you why people are dissatisfied. So what is being organised is a series of workshops with tenants to understand why they're dissatisfied, what is it about the service that's causing problems, and that will allow us to put some plans in place. We've discussed previously here and in scrutiny that there have obviously been particular issues with facing leaseholders, particularly in terms of recharging, and there's an ongoing project which Astrid is leading around that.
Councillor Aisi, did you want to say anything about the violence with injury crime data, which obviously is something shared with the police? It's not something we can impact solely on our own as a council.
As you know, there has been an increase, not just in Haringey, London-wide, and we are working with our partners and with the police to ensure, well, it reaches a steady decline. I think that's what I can say at this point.
Okay, the report is just for noting, so ask Cabinet to note the report. Item 12, Councillor Strickland, the homelessness strategy.
Thank you, Leader. So members will be aware that we previously agreed a housing strategy which adopted as one of its key priorities doing more to support people who are facing homelessness. So lots of work has been done to really flesh out what that means, what needs to happen, what steps need to be taken. And this report sets that out. So members will be aware that homelessness is a growing problem, all the different types of homelessness, and it's one of the biggest challenges that our residents face. So we're determined to have in place a proper and detailed plan, but we're also fundamentally keen to really shift how we deal with homelessness and make clear that this has to be system-wide action by the council, by the voluntary sector, by the NHS, by GPs, schools and others. We have to work much, much more closely together because that's the only way that we'll better prevent homelessness, given that homelessness often is a symptom of deeper social issues which are not always within our direct control. So what this strategy sets out is really three priorities: the need to intervene earlier, the need to do more to increase the supply of accommodation, but also to do more to meet the needs of the 3,000 households in temporary accommodation, to actually help those households to move on, to get the support they need with some of the issues they face. Important to mention to Cabinet that this work has been developed with officers here at the back there, working very much with the Homelessness Forum that we have, so working with providers and other agencies, which is really important. There's also been resident consultation. So I think a really important step, which will, I think, mark a step change in how we deal with homelessness in the borough.
Thanks, Councillor Strickland. Cabinet, if you could turn to page 147 of the report, section 3.1 and 3.2. Are those recommendations agreed? Thank you. Item 13 is the rough sleeping strategy. Councillor Strickland.
Thank you, Leader. So this was originally part of the homelessness strategy, but given the increase in rough sleeping in the borough and our determination to do something to support rough sleepers and end rough sleeping in the borough, and we felt it was important to have a separate report. Again, this has been discussed with the Homelessness Forum and really sets out three priorities. The first is for more rapid intervention to get people off the streets as quickly as possible. The second is to improve health and well-being and resilience for people sleeping on the streets, because inevitably rough sleepers face some of the most drastic health inequalities of anyone in the borough. Rough sleeping comes with significant risk of violence, sexual abuse and other serious problems which we want to do more to protect people from. And thirdly, to tackle street activity associated with rough sleeping, and that's to reduce harm to rough sleepers themselves and some of the issues it can cause from a minority of rough sleepers to communities. But again, makes clear that enforcement action will always be our last resort, and the focus here is on support, on prevention and on getting people off the streets as quickly as possible.
Okay. On this report, if we could turn to page 221, the recommendations are set out on that page. Are they agreed? Okay, item 14 is the housing allocations update. Councillor Strickland.
Thank you, Leader. This is a brief report which just updates our allocations policy in line with the Homelessness Reduction Act.
Okay, turning here to page 285, section 3.1, recommendations that's set out there agreed. Thank you. The Good Growth Fund is item 15. We're going to deal with the item at this point. There is a small piece of exempt information that relates to this item. Councillor Goldberg.
Thank you, Leader. The Good Growth Fund is not my term. It's a scheme run by the Mayor of London to promote growth, regeneration, that is seen as inclusive and innovative. I'm quite pleased to say that we have a bid for £900,000 to support our plans in Wood Green. Primarily, the nature of that plan is to fulfil our ambition to create a more livable Wood Green and to increase the kind of green open space that exists within our reconstruction programmes as we extend the footprint of the town centre. 4 minuting, and I can provide you with a copy here, but on the record, we have been informed that the nature of that award was originally put in as a grant and a loan, so £700,000 grant and £200,000 loan. That's reflected in the current report. We've been advised that should we be successful, and we don't obviously yet know whether we are successful, that the entire award will take the form of a grant, and the report should be amended accordingly in paragraph 4.2 to reflect that, by adding the lines, but the GLA have advised that they are minded toward 100% grant, so that funding will be a £900,000 grant and no loan. On paragraph 8.1, reference to loan arrangement agreements in the second bullet with third parties can be omitted. In paragraphs 8.2, where it says the Connecting Wood Green bid was for £700,000 grant plus £200,000 loan, that should be amended accordingly. But the GLA advised that they are minded to award 100% grant, and so the funding will be a £900,000 grant and no loan. On paragraph 8.3, the table can be amended accordingly so that the £200,000 loan element of the project for the gasworks project is omitted, and the grant for the gasworks project is increased from 300 to 500. And paragraph 8.7, finance comments about the loan are having in place adequate controls for its repayment can be omitted. Paragraph 8.8, reference to loan agreements with third parties can also be omitted. And paragraph 8.12, legal comments about the loan can also be omitted. If I can provide a copy of those, it might be easier than taking notes at the speed at which I'm speaking. That's all, Leader. I'm happy to recommend this to the Council.
Excellent, and all sounds like good news, and we have a copy of the note that's just been passed up to us. Can we agree the recommendations set out, page 369, 3.1, 3.2? Thank you. Item 16 is the planning obligations SPD. Councillor Strickland.
Thank you, Leader. So this is really part of our efforts to continue to push to get a strong deal for residents when regeneration and development happen, and to make sure that we're collecting Section 106 in the best possible way. So just a couple of things to highlight. The report sets out really our approach to getting developer contributions, and it makes clear that we won't accept market value, but instead we'll calculate value based on existing use value, which I think is really important in how we think about viability and makes a big difference to how we look at it, to the benefit of our residents. And secondly, makes clear that throughout the planning process, what we'll do, which we started doing already, but we'll do from now on more consistently, is to review development on a number of occasions to make sure that where there is uplift, where there is more value through what is sometimes quite a long regeneration process, we're taking more of that value for residents, for community facilities. And finally, again, it strengthens the requirements to contribute to employment and training. So throughout the report, Cabinet members will see that we're really strengthening our ability to draw benefits from regeneration for residents.
Okay. The recommendations on this report are page 451 and 452, sections 3.1 and 3.2. Cabinet members, are they agreed? Thank you. Item 17 is the transport strategy. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. So this paper reports on the outcome of the consultation on the draft Haringey transport strategy, which took place at the end of last year. And the transport strategy is key to delivering on our wider objectives of bringing new homes and jobs to Haringey, as well as improving the health and well-being of our residents. And we received over 50 responses to the strategy, and just over half were about bus routes serving Highgate School, and we will discuss those concerns with TfL. And the paper sets out the Council's response to all the comments received, and some changes have been made to the wording in the strategy as a result. And the intention now is to produce detailed action plans on each of the key areas of the strategy, starting with a walking and cycling action plan, which we hope to publish in the summer. There's just one update since the paper was written. It refers to the Mayor's transport strategy, which was subject to consultation last summer, and that's now been published for a GLA meeting later this week. And our strategy is very much in line with the Mayor's priorities. So Cabinet is asked to adopt the Haringey transport strategy. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Are we happy to agree and adopt this transport strategy? Thank you. Item 18 is the response to the joint targeted area inspection and consequent required actions. Councillor Weston.
Thank you, Chair. The joint targeted area inspection, which took place in late 2017, taken together with changes soon to be implemented by the Children and Social Work Act 2017 and a new Ofsted inspection regime for local authority children's services, provides a platform for changes both within children's services and across our partnerships, so including with the police and our health partners, to deliver the right support at the right time for children, young people and families who need it. The report before you promises no quick fixes, and implementing it will take time and energy and dedication. But it is the right thing to do, both in terms of responding to the JTAI process and in meeting the needs of our community. The paper sets out a model which will have an even greater emphasis on early help across the partnership and on working with our partners to achieve the best outcomes for children and young people in the borough. And I'd ask colleagues to agree the recommendations.
Thank you very much for that introduction. If people turn to page 661 of their agenda pack, they will see that the recommendation is set out there on 661. Apologies, on 632. I'm reading the wrong recommendation. 632 to 633 is. The recommendations agreed. Apologies. We're now moving on to the lack sufficiency strategy. Item 19, Councillor Weston.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, is there a legal requirement for all local authorities to adopt a looked after children sufficiency strategy? The strategy, as set out, will help us to meet our duties as corporate parents and to ensure that we can meet the needs of our looked after children.
Thank you. We're being asked this evening, as Councillor Weston says, to approve the strategy which is attached at Appendix 1. Is that agreed? Moving on then to item 20, the disposal of the site on Bernard Road, which has exempt information, which is at item 27. But Councillor De Mercy, can you introduce the item for us?
Thank you, Leader. This report is for the disposal of Bernard Road site for it to be developed as affordable live-work units space. Chair, as you know, through our local plan, which highlighted that we need more workspace, and this development will lend itself to achieving or going towards achieving that quota. And the site, Chair, currently has 5 low-quality work units, whereas the new development will accommodate 40 new businesses and provide up to 240 jobs. Chair, with that, I'll put the recommendations to Cabinet.
Okay, Councillor Engert, and I'll take Councillor Vanier first as you come up, Councillor Engert, if you want to take a seat. Councillor Vanier.
Thank you. Could you tell us how the land valuation was arrived at for that site?
Will do, Councillor Vanier. Chair, as a site for disposal, we usually goes through the councils. We have a property specialist, a commercial property specialist, GL Hearn, who have advised us, and they have undertaken a valuation of the site and have confirmed the price agreed represents best consideration to the council in terms of value. We can have that discussion more openly in the exempt part of the item, Chair.
Councillor Engert, your question.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 4 questions. On page 711, 4.5 and 720, 8.12. The current public green space on this site is due to be built on. Where will it be re-provided? Will it be in the close vicinity, and will it still be public? Where and when will if it does get agreed, where and when will the intention of the council to appropriate the current green space be advertised? On page 714 to 5, 612 to 6 and 616, I note that 25,000 square feet of workspace is expected to be provided in this scheme, and that the GCAP Investments neighbouring site will lose 20,579 square feet of business space. How much business space, square footage, will be lost on the Haringey portion, and will there be a net gain or loss of business space on the combined site? And a related question, what sort of businesses are currently on the 2 sites, and will these businesses meet the criteria set out in 616 to be relocated in the new workspace? I'd be grateful if you could speak up, because I am hard of hearing.
Absolutely, Councillor. The green space is being relocated on the same site. Sorry, let me just bring this a bit more closer. This green space currently is, I think, is roughly about 645 square metres, if I'm right, or somewhere in that vicinity. 630 square metres currently, and it will be 1,000 square metres when it's re-provided. I think it's to the... Peter will correct me on this. I think it's to the south of the site. Am I right? Okay. In terms of the green space will be public. It will be for public use. It will have soft landscaping for use by the local residents and anyone who wishes to use the green space. And it will be, in my view, it will be better than what is there currently. The appropriation of the land, I think I'll get Peter to answer that question. In terms of the net gain, currently it has 5 units I think on our site, providing, I don't know how many jobs, but it will have 40, provide space for 40 units or 40 businesses, employing 240, up to 240 jobs. So one will assume that is actually a net gain from its current use. And as far as I'm aware, the current businesses will be able to return to the site as it is, with better facilities. And just to say that this site offers value per square metre that you will not get anywhere in London. Hence, the cost of the site. I'll get Peter to answer the other question.
So in terms of appropriation of land, the route that we're intending to go in relation to this is that through, when the matter comes for consideration of Planning Committee next week, it's the intention to designate it as open space through the Section 106. So that will be an absolute clear statement in terms of it being held as public open space for the future. And just to reiterate what Councillor Mercy said in relation to businesses being able to move back into it, that is absolutely the case. Just to give you one figure, the smallest units in it will be available from as little as £365 per month. So this is genuinely affordable workspace. The idea is to help retain as many businesses as possible, but also provide space for new businesses as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Engert, for your final question to Cabinet. Right. I take it then you haven't got any questions on item 21, and I feel a little disappointed. Haringey's commitment to becoming an LGBT plus inclusive borough, non-key.
Very key, thank you, Leader. This is my last report to Cabinet. Right, so, well, I haven't said anything yet. Just trying to drown me out. Right. Right, so we've been doing some work on LGBT issues in the Council, and that's really been led in two directions. So Janelle, who's the Director of Public Health, has been working really hard for a couple of years now on internal workforce issues for LGBT staff. And that has included working closely with Stonewall, doing internal audits, setting up a staff network, and is now leading a sort of a process of better data collection so that we can track LGBT applicants and progression, which is very important. Equally, members will be aware that through the supported housing review, the fact that we weren't meeting the needs of LGBT people in supported housing, whether that's in older people's care or for younger people fleeing family persecution, that was identified as a key gap, and that's something we've been working on. Now, what this report really says is, that's great, and that's fine, that's a good start, but we need to take a much more systematic approach. We need to think across the Council about this. So what this report does is, it's a very simple report. It's really just to start a conversation. So firstly, it's transparent in setting out an action plan, so it sets out what we're doing already. And the hope is that that action plan generates a debate more for the gaps in it than what it's got in it already. We hope that colleagues and residents will say, oh, what about this, what about that, which would be very helpful. But it also sets out four, I suppose, initial priorities for further discussion, and they are that we make sure that LGBT residents have a stronger voice in shaping priorities and services. That's come across very clearly from the initial workshops we've held, that needs are not fully understood. Secondly, that we're better at exercising system leadership, by which I mean that this won't work unless the NHS, the CCG, the police and other bodies are prepared to do this better. And again, colleagues from our service have been honest that they don't feel they really understand this agenda well enough, and they're happy to work with us to do better. Thirdly, to make Haringey a safer place for LGBT people, and also to make the Council an inclusive workplace, which is, I think is really important. So, as I said, this is not a formal strategy, but hopefully this will start a conversation with a view that officers working with a future administration will hopefully continue this work and develop a wider strategy in consultation with the LGBT community and with staff and stakeholders.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions at all? Councillor Hearn has a question.
I'm very pleased to see this. I think I was responsible for a previous one in the 1980s, so this is very good we're coming back round to this again. What do you think might be the challenges in trying to move this forward?
Councillor Strickland, do you want to start? I don't know if you want to bring in Janelle if you need.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hearn, and thank you for your support. You've consistently supported the work that's been done on this, which is fantastic. In terms of the challenges, we had a workshop in this chamber some months ago, facilitated by a charity called Opening Doors, who work with older LGBT people, and we had primarily sort of service providers, the police, the NHS, the voluntary sector. And some of the key challenges that came out of that workshop were really, those service providers being very honest about saying, look, we commission services that are delivered in part to the LGBT community, but actually, being honest, we don't really understand what LGBT residents need, and we don't really understand the difference between the L, the B, the G and the T. We don't know where to get data on this stuff, so actually public servants being quite honest that they had very, very basic knowledge and really, really need a lot of support to do better on this. So that, I think, is a major challenge in exercising that system leadership. But I have to say, I'll pass over to Janelle in terms of the internal challenges that she's come across. But I think some good progress is being made.
Thanks, Councillor. I think it's important in terms of LGBT issues as well as inclusivity more generally. It's about visibility, and the challenge is to make everything we do about being inclusive, and so that it's not seen as a sideline or a nice to have, that actually these are residents who absolutely can contribute amazingly to the borough, but also might have needs, might need support, might be disproportionately victims of hate crime, etc. So I think for me that the challenge is really both to mainstream it, but also to keep it distinctive in terms of what the particular concerns of this community are.
I'll indulge you, Councillor Hearn. You can have another question.
Indulge me, please. Yes. What I quite like to know is there's two issues I think I need to. One is about intersectionality and how we ensure that LGBT people from different communities, issues, concerns and needs are actually met, because I have found in previous experience that when we've been doing this kind of work, it's been kind of generalised. It's been quite hard to get some of the L's and the T's in for a start, but it's actually been really difficult to actually remember that the community includes black and ethnic minority, disabled people and younger people as well. So my second concern is that we have in the past had a thriving voluntary sector with some good LGBT groups, and I know that there's a bit of a struggle, and I'd like to know really what needs to be done to ensure that the community is strong too.
Do you want to take those, Councillor Strickland?
Yeah, if I start, and John might come in on the voluntary sector bit. I absolutely agree with you, Councillor Hearn, and in the meeting we had in this room with service providers, the issue of intersectionality came up a lot, mainly with service providers saying they didn't understand it, as you will not be surprised to hear. But you had people from the community obviously explaining that, if you're a young person, particularly from a BME background, who is facing significant trouble at home, and you're being made homeless because of lack of understanding around these issues, or worse, active discrimination from your family, that's obviously very different in terms of what you need and what sort of support the public sector should provide. If you're an older gay man who's got advanced HIV and lots of complex medical needs, those two people don't necessarily have much in common, although they're both LGBT. So you're absolutely right that I think a key priority going forward will be to explore that more. And if I ask Janelle to pick up the voluntary sector bit of this and working externally.
Yes, and clearly the voluntary sector element has changed quite, not just in terms of LGBT issues, but others over the last few years. A very positive development, though, is that next week there's a first meeting of Haringey LGBT+ community network, and there are about 5 or 6 organisations coming together, facilitated by the council, to start to look at, can we get together a community network of organisations and build that for Haringey, and look at putting in grant bids and so on. I'm very happy to meet with you, Councillor Hearn, and talk you through that and see whether you can get involved in that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And just to echo Councillor Hearn's point and to thank Councillor Strickland and Janelle for all the work that you've done in leading this, can I ask Cabinet to turn to the recommendations set out, page 728, and agree those recommendations? Thank you. Moving on then to note the minutes of key decisions taken in February. Item 22. Item 23, noting significant and delegated actions taken by directors in January. We don't have any new items of urgent business to consider, so at this point we need to exclude the press and public from the remainder of the meeting. Oh, sorry.
Before you do, I think it's worth saying that obviously this is your last cabinet as leader. I think it's rare in politics that leaders get to choose their own date of departure, and it goes without saying that you served nearly the best part of a decade as leader of this borough, and I say leader of this borough, not just leader of this council. I think it's fair to say that there's not very many people who volunteered for the job, so the accusation of careerism kind of sticks raw with me when we think about the context in which you took over the leadership of this borough. In the wake of where Children's Services was as a performing council. In fact, where the council was performing, I think, was quite frankly a shadow of where the council stands today within the regard it's held within the local government sector. In fact, the regard it's held within public services, full stop. I think we see that in the talent that Haringey is now able to attract in terms of the officer corps that we are able to come. I think we see that in the performance of our schools. I think we see that in the performance of our public services across the piece. And as the chief gobshite in the cabinet, I feel comfortable swearing because it's also my last cabinet, so if someone wants to refer me to standards, they're very welcome to do so. It was called on me to give you a vote of thanks for the work that you've done and to give praise to the legacy which you'll leave this borough and the shoes which you will leave, which will be incredibly enormous to fill. The last thing I think, just to really spell that out to people, is I think without a doubt through the baby P crisis, through the riots in 2011, through the work to make Haringey literally the fastest growing potential economy in London between now and 2030 is enormous, and it leaves to your successors to fulfil that promise to our residents, to make sure that there is a solution for the homes that need to be built, for the jobs that need to be created. We've had our own disputes, and I've always been very clear that your vision has been about what we can do, not about what we shouldn't do. It should be about can do within the parameters which we have at our hands at the disposal, because only real change is a mandate on which can be delivered and a promise worth offering. I think that's sat at the heart of your politics, and it absolutely has been politics. It's politics that is to drive a more equal borough. And if anyone is any doubt about that, it's worth looking at things like the social mobility reports that now say there are no discernible differences between a 0-year-old and a 1-year-old in terms of development in rich and poor in this borough. That is a fantastic achievement when in development terms alone, those are the most important months when the gap between rich and poor exists, is in that very first year of development. So well done. Well done on STEM. Well done on your legacy on carbon. Well done on managing a budget. And for all the attacks we've had, be clear that the cuts, I think, would have been far worse without the clarity of what's important about what we do. That, for me, was the one borough, one future strategy, and it leaves for others to make sure that they maintain it. Thank you.
Just to say thank you very much. I think the first thing to say is it's an absolute privilege to live in a borough like Haringey, but also to lead a borough like Haringey, even when you take on that role in very difficult circumstances. And the second thing I'd say is that politics is a team sport. And I look around the cabinet table and I look at people who are friends as well as colleagues and, you know, very, very principled people. And I feel it's been an honour to serve with all of you. I will speak more, I suspect, at full council, but also to say I look around the table and I look at the officer support that we have, and I've been a leader who's been privileged to work with great officers throughout my time in Haringey, but the one thing I'm very clear of now is that we have many more outstanding officers than we had in the past, and that makes the job of politics so much easier, the job of political leadership so much easier. So to thank you, Zena, but the whole officer team is something that I want to do, and really to say it's been an absolute privilege and a blast, and yeah, I'll miss it.